1. Farewell the Humanities Childhood. To take one example, Ian Morris 2015, Foragers, Farmers, and Fossil Fuels, How Human Values, how human values evolve sets itself the ambitious challenge of finding a uniform measure of inequality applicable across the entire span of human history by translating the values of Ice Age hunter-gatherers, the Neolithic farmers, into terms familiar to modern-day economies, and then using these to establish Gini coefficients, i.e., formal inequality rates. It's a laudable experiment, but one that quickly leads to some very odd conclusion. For instance, in a 2015 piece of the New York Times, Morris estimated the income of a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer at 1.10 a day, back to 1990 currency values. Where does this figure come from? Presumably, it has something to do with the calorific value of daily food intake. But if we're comparing this to daily incomes today, wouldn't we also have to factor in all the other things Paleolithic foragers got for free, but which we ourselves would expect to pay for? Free security, free dispute resolution, free primary education, free care of the elderly, free medicine, not to mention entertainment costs, music, storytelling, and religious services. Even when it comes to food, we must consider quality. After all, we're taking about one 100% organic free-range produce here, washed down with Brooks natural spring water. Much contemporary income goes to the mortgage and rents, but consider the camping fees of prime Paleolithic locations along the Dogne of the Fezere, not to mention the high-end evening classes in the naturalistic rock painting and ivory carving, and all those were costs. Surely all these must cost widely in excess of 1.10 a day, as we'll see in chapter 4. It's not for nothing that anthropologists sometimes refer to foragers as the original affluent society. Such a life today wouldn't come cheap, would not come cheap. Admittedly, this is all bit this is all bit silly, but that's really our point. If one reduces world history to Gini coefficients, silly things will necessarily follow. Fukuyama 2, Fukuyama 2011, 43, 43, 53, 4, Diamond 2011, Diamond 2012, 10, 15, Fukuyama 2011, 48, Diamond 2011, 2012, 11. In the 6. In the case of Fukuyama and Diamond 1 can, and Diamond 1 can, at least, note that they were never trained in the relevant disciplines. The first is political scientist, the other has a PhD on the physiology of gallbladder. Still, even when anthropologists, archaeologists, and historians try their hand at big picture narratives, they have an odd tendency to end up with some similarly minor variation on Rousseau, Flannery, and Marcus 2011. The question of inequality, how our prehistoric ancestors set the stage of monarchy, slavery, and empire, for example, over all sorts of interesting insights into how inequality might emerge in human societies, but the overall framing of human history remains explicitly wedded to Rousseau's recon discourse, concluding that humanity's best hope of a more egalitarian future is to put hunter and gatherers in charge, while the settlers more economically informed study the great level violence and history of inequality from the Stone Age to the 21st century 2017. Concludes just as dismally. Thus, there really nothing we can do about inequality. Civilization invariably puts in charge a small elite who grab money and of the pie. The one only thing that has ever been successful in dislodging them is catastrophe in the form of war, like mass conscription, wholesale suffering, and death. Half half measures never work. So if you don't want to go back to live in a cave or die in a nuclear holocaust, which presumably also ends up with the survivors in caves, you are just you're just going you're just going to have to accept the existence of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. To Rousseau 7 Rousseau 1984 1754 78 as articulated by Judith Clark, 1964. They are not Harvard political theorists. 9. Rousseau, 1984, 1754, 1754, 122. As a matter of fact, Rousseau, unlike Hobbes, was not a fatalist. For Hobbes, all things large and small in history were to be understood as the unfolding of force set into motion by God, which are ultimately beyond the capacity of humans to control. See Hunter 1989. Given the dialogue making a garment is entering for his first stage into a flow of historical entanglements that he is powerless to resist and of which he is largely unaware, his precise actions are tiny links in a great chain of causality that is the very fabric of human history, and in this rather extreme metaphysics of entanglement, to suggest that he might have been doing these things some alternative way is to deny the whole irreversible course of world history. For Rousseau, by contrast, what humans make, they could always unmake, or at least do differently. We could free ourselves from the chains that bind us. It just wasn't going to be easy. See again, Clark, 1964, for a classic discussion of this aspect of Rousseau's thought. 11. Pinkers, 2012, 39, 43. If a trace of 12. If a trace of impatience can be detected in our presentation, the reason is this: so many contemporary authors seem to enjoy imagining themselves as modern-day counterparts to the great social philosophers of the Enlightenment, men like Hobbes and Rousseau, playing out playing out the same grand dialogue with a more accurate cast of characters. That dialogue, in turn, is drawn from the empirical findings of social scientists, including archaeologists and anthropologists like ourselves. Yet, in fact, the quality of this empirical generalization is hardly better. In some ways, it's probably worse. At some point, you have to take the toys back from the children. 13. Pinker, 2012, 2018. 14. Pinker, 2012, 42. 15. Tilly, 2015. Formi 16. Formicola, 2007. 17. Margaret Mead did this once when she suggested that the first sign of civilization in human history was a tool used but the 50,000-year old skeleton that showed signs of having healed from a broken framework. It takes 6 weeks, she noted, to recover from such an injury. More animals with broken femurs simply die because their companions abandon. One of the things that makes hu- that makes humans so unusual is precisely that we take care of one another in such situations. Below and 21. As others point out, Yanomami tend to sleep together 6 to even 10 people in the same bed. This requires a degree of cognitive mutual accommodation of which few contemporary social theories would be capable. If they were really anything like the fixed like the fixed surfaces of the of undergraduate caricature, there would be no Yanomami, as they all all have long since killed each other by snoring. 19. In reality, far from being pristine exemplars of our ancestral condition, the Yanomami in the 1960s to 1980s, when canon conducted fieldwork among them, had been exposed to decades of European incursions, intensified by the discovery of gold on the lands. Over that period, Yanomami populations were decimated by epidemics of infectious diseases introduced by missionaries, prospectors, and anthropologists and government agents. See Copenhagen and Albert 2013 2 3, Cajon in 1988. Somewhere about the statistics Cajon presented and his claim that men who achieve a state of ritual purity unokai obtain more wives and offspring than others. A key issue here, which cannot never entirely clear up, is that unokai status was not reserved for one who had killed. It could also be achieved, for example, by shooting an arrow into the corpse of an enemy already slain, or indeed by causing death through non-physical means, so as sorcery. Others pointed out that most Unokai were on the older side of the age spectrum, and some held the status of the village headman. What would have ensured more offspring with no direct relationship to warfare. Still others pointed out a logical flaw in Cajon's suggestion that homicide acted both as deterrent to further killing, the Unukai having earned a fixed reputation, and at the same time kept in motion a cycle of revenge killings on the part of embittered kinsmen, a kind of war of all against all. Criticisms of Canyon, Albert 1989, Ferguson 1989, and C. Canyon 1990 for a response. Gates 2001. Academics are very prone to a phenomenon called schismogenesis, which we will be exploring at various points in this book. The framers of the U.S. Constitution, for example, were quite explicitly anti-democratic and made clear in their unpublished statements that they designed the federal government in large part to the head of the risk of democracy breaking out in one of the former colonies. They were particularly worried about Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, actual direct democratic decision-making had been practiced regularly in various parts of Africa or Amazonia, or for that matter in Russian or French peasant assemblies for dozens of years. See Graeber 2007b. For example, one would one would not have to waste one's time coming up with convoluted reason why, say, forms of decision making that look like democracy outside Europe are not really democracy. Philosophical arguments about nature that take that, that take rigorous logical form are not really science, etc. Canyon 1998 990 chose to end his famous science paper with an anecdote to this very effect. A particularly acute insight into the power of law to thwart killing for revenge was provided to me by a young Yanomamo man in 1987. He had been taught Spanish by missionaries and sent to the territorial capital for training in practical nursing. There, he discovered police and laws. He excitedly told me that he had visited the town's largest pata the territorial governor and urged him to make law and police available to his people so that they would not have to engage any longer in the wars of revenge and have to live in constant fear. Pinker 2012 554 as recounted by Valero to Ettore Bioca and published in 1985 under the latter's authorship, for which see the evidence compiled in a 1977 thesis by J. N. Help, The Assimilation of Captives on the American Frontier of the 18th and 19th Centuries. In his 19 in his 1782 letters from an American farmer, J. Hector St. John de Creveso noted how parents at the end of war would visit Indian towers to reclaim their children. To their inexpressible expressible sorrow, they found them so completely Indianized that many knew them no longer, and those whose more advanced age permitted them to recollect their fathers and mothers absolutely refused to follow them and ran to their adopted parents for protection against the effusions of love their unhappy real parents lavished upon them. Cited in Hart 1977 55 6, who also notes Crawford's conclusion that the Indians must possess a social bond singularly captivating and far superior to anything to be boasted for among of us. Franklin 1961 1753 481 3. Alas, alas, wrote James Willard Schultz, an 18-year-old for a prominent New York family who married into the Blackfoot, remaining remaining with them until they were driven on the reservation. Why could not this simple life have continued? Why must the swarms of the settlers have invaded that wonderful land and robbed its lots and all that made and its lot of all that made life worth living? They knew not care, nor hunger, nor want of any kind. From my window here I hear the roar of great city and see the cars hurrying by, born to the wheel, and there is no escape from it except by death. And this is civilization. I, for one, maintain that there is no happiness in it. The Indians of the plains long knew what was perfect content and happiness, and that we are taught is the chief and aim of man to be free from want, worry, and care. Civilization will never furnish it except to the very few. Such 1935 46. She also had 1977 42. She had 1977 44 with references. For example, the rendered Huron societies of northeastern North America in the 17th century, to which we turn in the next chapter, of whom Trigger 1976 62 notes that relations of the friendship and material reciprocity were extended beyond the Huron Confederacy in the form of trade arrangements. In the historic period, trade was a source not only of luxury goods but of meat and skins which were vital to a population that had outstripped the resources of its nearby hunting territory. Important as these goods were, however, foreign trade was not merely an economic activity, it was embedded in a network of social relations that were fundamentally extensions of, uh, of the friendly relationships that existed within the Huron Confederacy. Our emphasis for a general anthropologist survey of archaic trade. The classic source remains served 1981-1982. Most contemporary archaeologists are well aware of this literature but tend to get caught up in debate over the difference between trade and gift exchange, while assuming that the ultimate point of both is to enhance somebody's status, each by profit or by prestige or both. Most we also acknowledge that there is a something inherently valuable, even even cosmology significant in the phenomenon of travel. The experiments of remote places of the acquisition of exotic materials, but in the last resort, much of this much of this too seems to come down to questions of status or prestige, as if no other possible motivation might exist for people interacting even over long distances. For some further discussion on the issues, see Wengrow 2010b on dream economics among the Iroquois. See Graeber 2001 145 9. Following Charles Hudson's 1976 89 71 interpretation of Cabeza and Farah's account. The Boyer 2001.